Dale, I don't know if you can hear me, but you're on mute. I can't hear you. No sound.
All right, there we go.
There you are.
Yeah, I didn't mute it. It muted me for some reason. Well, anyway, for all those of you that didn't get to hear it already, because even though I've said it, you couldn't hear me. I want to welcome everyone to the podcast. And like I said, I was trying to explain, we got people from all over the world watching this podcast, and I'm so grateful that each and every one of you are here. People from Australia, people from the UK, even got some viewers from Germany as well. And so, really appreciate the support that I get. But today we have our special guest, Brit Elders, and she's really an expert when it comes to Billy Meier. But I wanted to go ahead and do a few slides and basically show her real quick, show the slides and the different things that are going on. This is a Brit. I don't know if that was what year that was from, but definitely a beautiful picture. The advertisement for the podcast. Now, Britt is not only a UFO investigator, she's also an author. And really what we're here to talk about today is her republishing of the book, UFOs Contact from the Pleiades. And as you can see, she's a well-accomplished author as well. This is the book. It actually was two books combined into one. Right. And so she's since republished that one. And let me just give you a little bit of bio on her real quick. It says Brit Elders is an investigative author and documentary filmmaker who's traveled the world exploring a variety of topics, including the mysterious world of UFOs. She has worked on many in-depth investigations, including the Billy Meier case and the wave of UFO sightings in Mexico, which began in 1991 and continues today. An internationally published author, Britt focuses her attention or research and work on nonfiction topics. She has written books, articles, documentary films, and ghostwritten and edited for others with the goal of each project. She is the CEO of ShirleyMacLaine.com, a position she's held since its inception. An advocate for neuropathic health and healthy eating, Britt has hosted radio programs and been a guest on radio and television in the U.S. as well as other countries. Britt has lived in Arizona her entire life. And so once again, welcome to the channel. I apologize for the problems we had. I don't know how to explain it. The first one, I'm not even sure what the problem was, but I'm just glad it's fixed. And that's the first time I've ever come on and it's had me muted. So it's just not my day, I guess. I kind of feel a little bit for how Matt Ford feels, because it seems like he has the same stuff happen in his channels. But you know what? We got past all that.
It's good. Yeah,
it's good. We're going to get into the really good stuff. Let's go ahead and go back to 1975, Britt. And let's talk about you and your husband, Lee, and the business that you had together. And I think it was called Intercept. And so can you tell us a little bit? I know it was cybersecurity, but can you explain that a little bit more so maybe the audience will understand exactly what your business was?
In layman's terms, what we did was we prevented telephones and computers from being eavesdropped on. So we had a thriving company. Intercept was international. We were working with Fortune 500s and financial institutions all around the world. And it was a good company, very substantial in what we did, had great success with it. And then someone, a friend of ours, suggested we look into UFOs, specifically one case, and it sort of changed the trajectory of our lives forever.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, that's what I was going to get to is, you dealt with some Fortune 500 companies, and how do you go from cybersecurity to investigating UFOs? I mean, how in the world do you make that jump? I get that there's investigation in both, but how do you get from one to the other?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Lee had a very strong background in private investigation, and he had worked in different sources all through the states here. So we both had a basic knowledge of what investigation itself entails, especially with intercept. But then it just, setting one, which is very physical 3D thump on it type thing, and set it aside and go into this ethereal type thing, which is UFOs and are they there, aren't they there? It was really something. Our Fortune 500 people didn't quite understand. Um, they were okay with it because we were doing a good job for them. But at the same time, they thought we had kind of lost our marbles and pulled back from being quite so. And they were always confident in what we did, but they didn't want anybody knowing that we were working with them when we finally came out with the books and talked about what was happening in Switzerland. So we just basically followed investigative criteria. If you have an object, what is that object? How do you analyze it? With the Meier case, there was metal, there were movie footage clips, there was photographs, and there was sound recordings. Those were the physical forms of evidence. So we had to find people that had the knowledge and the expertise to analyze that. That just followed the basic criteria for any form of investigation. Doesn't matter if it's counterespionage work or if it's murder one or a UFO case. You follow the basics of investigation.
Okay. Well, I want to take us back to 1975, though. And I want you to, wasn't it Colonel Stevens that kind of communicated with you and Lee? And wasn't he finally the one that got you guys to go over there?
That's right. He had seen the photographs, and then he called us one day from Tucson. We lived in Phoenix. And he said, "You've got to get down here right now." And we went. We were curious. When we got there, Lou Zinstag was there, and she had blown up photographs of Meier's craft all over the kitchen table. We're looking at it, shaking our heads, saying it's too good to be true. That's the initial reaction. And we sort of backed out of it at that point because it did look too good to be true. Wendell went over to Switzerland, met with Meier, came back, thoroughly convinced something was going on. And eventually he convinced us to put intercept behind the investigation into the Meier Pleiadian contact case.
So was that because of the resources that you guys could bring to bear? Was that the main reason?
Yes, and because we knew what it entails to investigate something.
Okay. I don't have a history of your books and stuff that you've written, but was this the first books that you wrote, or were there some?
It actually was.
Okay, so this is kind of your beginning.
Yeah.
This was the beginning of your career as being a writer, being an author, and stuff like that. Now, I can only imagine, though, because I've never been to Switzerland. I've been outside the United States. I've been to a lot of countries, but I can only imagine what it was like to go to Switzerland. And we know that Billy was a farmer, from the books and stuff like that. But what was your first impression when you got your feet on the ground there at the farm itself? What was your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, it was right after Billy had moved into the farm in Schmidrudy there. And it was pretty dilapidated. It was run down, no indoor plumbing. It needed a lot of work. Some of the trees were diseased. You could see that. They needed to be removed. It was basically a piece of land that didn't look like it had been cared for. The house was a typical Swiss house. On one side was the barn and all of that. On the other side was the house, the living quarters. The kitchen had a wood stove in it, as well as it did have a gas stove, but it had a wood stove in it. That's where they baked bread and things like that. Great smells always came out of that kitchen. Um, but the rooms were small. There were curtains across doorways. It wasn't anything special at all. It was very humble, really.
Okay, so when you got there, there was a film crew there, correct?
That's right. There was a crew in from Zurich that was interviewing Meier. They had heard about his experiences, and they had several of the witnesses there, which was great because right as we got to the farm, that was the first thing that we were met with was this film crew and the witnesses. We had an opportunity to speak to the witnesses at that point. It was really remarkable that they came forward and so open about it. They talked about what they had seen, what they had experienced, what Billy had told them. Each of them was different from all different walks of life, an attorney, a pilot, a school teacher, and they came from Germany, they came from Switzerland, Italy, all over. It was intriguing to see that this would come together so quickly with this crew, this Swiss crew, to interview these people.
Did you get documentation on these different witnesses as
Oh,
far
yeah.
as their names and stuff? Because it reminds me of another case. I mean, the details after the initial contact itself are very different, but it reminds me of another case. And one of the reasons that I've always felt like Travis Walton is one of the best UFO cases out there is that was also in 1975.
Yes.
And there were 6 other witnesses there. And so, I mean, it's one thing if one person tells you something,
Mm-hmm.
but if you have 2 people or 3 people or 4 people or 5 people, I mean, it's far more convincing that, that it's real, when you got multiple people, especially like with Walton and them, they never backtracked on it all the years and stuff. So that was pretty remarkable. But my other question is, I don't know what you expected when you got there. I don't know what in your mind, how much you knew about Billy Meier, but what was your initial reaction when you saw him? Your gut instinct, what was it telling you when you first met the man for that first time, that very first time?
My initial reaction was he was very kind.
Mm-hmm.
He was simple, he was earthy, but he was kind, he was considerate. I watched him listen to people that had come from all over the planet to talk to him and just listen to their stories and then share a little of his, no matter how tired he was, no matter what he was doing, he would take the time to do that. I saw him interact with his children. Amazing. Bashinko, Methuselah, took Lee's 35 millimeter camera and literally took it apart piece by piece. And Lee turned around and was ready to blow his cork. And Billy says, "No, you don't do that. No, put it back together." And very calmly, without losing his cool at all. I mean, just a very centered man.
So what about language barriers when you got there?
He was pretty good with English. He had a few words he had problems with. When we ran into issues with language and translation, there was always someone there that could communicate Swiss German, his native tongue, and English, and work it out for us. But most of the time, the conversations were pretty direct between Billy and Lee and I, and just a good, solid conversation in English all the way through. He did have a good control of English at that point.
Oh, good. How long did you investigate? I mean, go back and forth. I mean, how many years are we talking about? We're not
7
talking weeks.
years.
How long?
7 years.
7 years. Wow.
And we lived at the farmhouse during that 7-year period over 365 days. They had a camp trailer set right next to the farmhouse, and that's where we stayed when we went over there.
Okay. So when you were there, you were like investigating, is that, for those 365 days in that 7-year period?
Yes, we were trying to figure out what was going on, who was coming in, talking to more witnesses, talking to the people that lived in the villages around, what they had seen, what they had witnessed. Watching Billy. We did bring in a couple of film crews from Japan with Junichi Yaoi. And that was great because Yaoi was there to capture some very interesting things. It was just continuation, trying to get more information. What did they say about this or that? Digging in deeper, because you couldn't do it over the phone or in letters. You needed to be there. And then to find, over a period of time, new photographs came about. After we quit the investigation, the photographs ceased. They didn't need them anymore, as far as what Billy said. The Pleiadians said the evidence had been presented. So they didn't need the photographs anymore. Nothing else new was coming in as far as hard evidence. So we basically wrapped up the investigation and tried to go on about life. But once you're in UFOs, you're never out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They draw you right back in.
Yeah.
That's for sure. In the 7 years that you were there, did you see anything paranormal, anything different that would, like, you left there knowing that indeed something was going on?
Yeah. Primarily, the biggest thing I remember is it had been raining for 2 days solid. Everything was a muddy mess. We woke up in the middle of the night in our little camp trailer, and we saw Billy walking off down this path behind the house that goes into the forest. So we got up the next morning, followed his footprints, and they vanished in the middle of a clearing.
Wow.
The footprints were there. They were, indentations in the mud with water in them. And then nothing.
Was that when you saw the light in the sky as well?
It was a different time. We Billy had taken off on the tractor that time, and we were going to wait up for him to see what happened. So we were standing outside. Everything lit up, and there were trees all around us, and the forest was lit from beneath the tree, above the tree, on the other side of the tree. It was an intense blue-white light. I've never seen anything like it. And it happened 3 times.
I was just going to say, what would you compare it to? But probably there's nothing you can compare it to.
Nothing at all. We turned around and looked at each other and said, "Did you see it? Was it real?" And then it happened again and again.
Okay. Let's get to the photos real quick.
Sure.
And we'll add those to the stage and bring them up just to let everybody have a look at some of these pictures so that they know exactly what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Some really nice pictures. They're actually clearer than what I have once you blow them up or you have to move them. I mean, it's like you lose, the pixels get worse and stuff like that. And so the pictures aren't so clear. But where did you guys, because one of the complaints that I've heard people say, and I want to be fair, is that the fact that he didn't produce negatives. Did you see negatives when you were doing the investigation? Because that's one of the complaints that somebody said, is that Billy wouldn't produce the negatives to prove that, that these were original pictures.
No, actually, we did see negatives.
Okay.
We saw the slides, the original slides. We talked to the man that actually processed the film for Billy, and most everything was in slide form.
Okay. And
so that just isn't factual. But how many people went over and talked to the man that processed the film, as well as had a deep understanding of what was going on with Billy? Many of the slides Billy did not want to turn loose of. I understand that. He had been ripped off. People would come in and say, "Oh, let me see." They'd go through the books and they'd rip off whatever they could get their hands on, which was really sad. But yeah, that was one of the first things we did, was go find who did this processing. Was it done in a shop? Was it sent out? It was done in-house. And the man said, "Absolutely, I did not touch this material. I just, gave him back the slides that he took."
Well, I was going to bring that up because I'd heard that, some of the materials and some of the photos and stuff were taken. Yes. And you get the idea, Billy's a farmer. I don't want to use the word naive, but maybe more trusting than what he should have been. He had an extraordinary story he wanted to tell. and people sometimes want to grab onto something that's so unique that they will lower their morals and do stuff that they shouldn't do. And so, you've got to guard that stuff. Now, one of the things I found was interesting is most skeptics, their complaints are that the pictures aren't clear enough, that these pictures of UFOs are all blurry and you can't see them. But in Billy Meier's case, it's that they were too clear. They were too good to be true.
Right.
And stuff. And so it's like you can't really win. Now, you had some of the metal tested, and like you said, I think you mentioned it earlier, and the companies didn't want their names to it, but they'd go ahead and do the test and stuff like that. Now, what did they reveal when they studied these metals? Did they come up with any kind of, what they were made of and what they compared to?
We took it. The first person that really got involved with the metal was Dr. Marcel Vogel with IBM. And he had it under a scanning electron microscope. There were only a few in the country at that time. Now, remember, you're back in 1975. You don't have the equipment today, the cameras that take great photographs that are on your phone. You don't have Photoshop. You don't have home computers back in 75. Marcel Vogel took the metal through a scanning electron microscope, and he saw that there was metal and then a crystal element, crystalline structure, and then a metal element. And that's how the metal was laid out. And there were obvious signs that it had striations throughout it, like it had been pulled in a cold process. That was one thing. And then the other thing was there was thulium in it. Thulium is a rare earth element that is almost impossible to extract. It's really expensive. Where would Billy have gotten thulium? How could he have put together a piece of metal that has crystalline structures, biorefringent materials, and pure metal samples right next to it? And by the time Marcel Vogel finished with it, he had a slew of scientists and metallurgists working with him, trying to understand what was going on with this process.
Okay. Well, since technology has advanced so much since 1975, is there any chance of getting some of this material retested with the technology we have today?
It's possible. I don't know that I'm willing to lay out the amount of money that it took to have it analyzed the first time around. It would be interesting, though, because we could learn so much from it if we really wanted to.
But if there was a university that would be interested and would want to undertake it just as a project for the university, you would be willing to do that. Obviously, you'd want some safeguards.
That's one of the interesting things is no one ever approached us and said, let us take it and test it, and this is a person we will use. They know what they're doing. Many people approached us and said, we know better than you, give it to us.
Right.
But they never had any backup as to who would be analyzing it, where it would be handled. And we were at JPL, we were at U of A, we were at Scripps, we were everywhere, IBM. But we paid for it out of pocket ourselves because we wanted to know.
Isn't that one of the reasons you wrote the first two books to begin with, to help fund your being able to go over there and to do all these tests and stuff like that? That was the purpose of writing these books and stuff, correct?
That's right. And we wanted to present the photographs in a unique way. So it's in a big photo journal. It's not in a little paperback book. It's not just about the details of the case. It's also the images, because I think they're very important to the case.
Yeah. Well, one thing that hasn't changed over the years, and that is the fact that the debunkers, they are still out there, still debunking. And my question for you is, I mean, you've obviously been at this for quite a while, and you're a personal friend of Billy and stuff. And so you've heard all of the attacks, you've heard what people have said, and that's going to happen with anybody that comes out with a remarkable story. There's just going to be people in this world are going to say, you know what, I just don't believe it. It doesn't fit my paradigm, it doesn't fit my way of thinking, so I can't believe it. But I do think that there's another factor in there, and
Hmm.
And I believe that it's very much involved in social media. My friend Rob Heatherly discovered that Wikipedia has been infiltrated by the guerrilla skeptics. You know, he was on Coast to Coast with George Knapp, 12 million viewers, and they've gone in, taken over 1,500 pages, and have basically taken the stuff out that would be favorable, to these pages, and then they demean them and they replace them with words,
That's so sad.
then how put off and others like that. And so there are, even today, there are people that are targeting anything paranormal. And so my question for you is, I'm kind of framing the question for you, is we believe that maybe some of the stuff that's going on in social media, especially related to UAPs and especially reverse engineering and crash retrieval and all of that, that there probably some coordinated efforts that are being undertaken, probably from the DOD or maybe even from private contractors trying to keep this secret. But my question is, did you feel at any point in time that there was a coordinated effort to try to destroy Billy's credibility, or to try to demean him and try to demean the evidence that was put forward? Did you ever feel like that took
No, I
place?
felt it was an uncoordinated
Okay.
attack. I really did. We had too many organizations, laboratories that were working with government that, and they gave us all the information. They allowed us to be there while it was being analyzed. They weren't hiding anything, and they weren't attacking us. They were saying, we don't know if we believe in contacts or UFOs or any of that, but we can't disprove what you have. So that just kind of propelled us forward. The attacks came really from different individuals in the UFO field. And the attacks were not designed to be intellectual attacks. Like they said, oh, it's a model on a fishing pole and a monofilament line. So we went in with a model designed and built by Wally Gentleman, and he has quite the history in designing models for movies. And we had our fishing line with monofilament line. We filmed it. We brought it back for analysis to compare it to the photographs. Right away, you could tell the edges were not right. They were too small. The pixels, when we had it all pixelated out through the computers and everything, the edge was very small compared to Meier's photographs. And you could definitely see that fishing line where you had nothing that was in Meier's photographs. So, no, it was just generalized attacks. I don't know why. I
That
think
was my next question. That was my
yeah,
next question. Why?
yeah, it's sad because so much can be learned if the different UFO groups, different individuals within there would get together and work together to really try to coordinate some of this information. So much more could be learned, and we would be much further ahead than we are right now. Instead, we have those that just, they like to attack, and that's okay. What it did for us was make us dig our heels in and want to explore deeper into the investigation, what we could do more, until we finally basically ran out of resources from the standpoint of where do you take it?
Right.
Once you've been to JPL, where else do you take it?
And once you've seen 20 pictures of
Yeah,
UFOs and stuff like that, I mean, what's another 10 or 50 going to make a
exactly.
difference in that? Yeah, that must have been, I guess in some ways, maybe you were lucky that you didn't have social media back then.
True.
Because the attacks can get pretty wicked. I was watching Need to Know, and it can get pretty heated. I think Ross, he has information from sources, but he's a reporter, so he's not going to give it up. But people making death threats
Yeah.
for him, death threats,
It's happened
over
to Billy.
a discussion.
Billy's been shot
Really?
at his home. Yes, sir.
Wow.
Wendell was there when one of the attempts on his life took place, and it just missed him. It just flew by his head. Somebody shot at him from up on the hill.
Did they ever catch the person?
No, and it's happened so many times, and it continues to happen. We were there when his daughter was chased by two guys trying to throw her into a van. And she was just a kid then. I mean, the family went through hell.
Yeah.
They really did.
Time you become a celebrity, there's unfortunately, whether you want it or not, what's going to happen. Tell me about the Pleiadians. Can you tell me a little bit about them? I think your story, let me help build this up a little bit. Your story begins in 1975. Is that correct in the books? Is that where it begins in the books?
That's where it begins in the books.
But when it goes as far as Billy goes, it dates all the way back, I think, to 1942, doesn't it?
He was 5 years old when he first saw a craft. He was with his father. They were in Switzerland. And he looked up and he saw this object in the sky. And he asked his dad what it was. And his dad, being the timing and everything, said, "Oh, it must be one of Hitler's crafts." And at that point, Billy thought, "That's strange." So he let it go. But then he began having contacts. And he had contacts with other beings from the time he was a child, telepathic communication, all through his travels in India and the Middle East.
Okay.
And then the face-to-face contact with Samyasa in 1975.
Okay, let me just give you what I discovered, and you can tell me how accurate it is. Now, I want to be clear. I want to absolutely be clear. I'm going to butcher names. Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to butcher names. I realized probably, originally written in Swedish, so or whatever language Switzerland is. So the pronunciations are a little bit different, but the understanding I have is, first of all, he was born February 3rd, 1937. 37 was a good year. I have to say that. I'm not just talking about wine. 37 was the year my mother was born as well. And so they were born the same year. Makes him 87 today. But his first contact, at least according to what I heard, was from the name that they use, and we talked about this earlier, the Pleiadian, I guess if you pronunciate that word correctly, was a gentleman by the name of Safath. And is that correct?
That's correct.
So he had contact with him. Safath died, and then you said other species, and so this may be it. In 1953, he had contact with an extraterrestrial. I'll get this one for you. I want you to see this one. By the name of not a Pleiadian, named Asket.
From the Doll universe.
Okay, I was going to say, from what universe?
Doll, DAHL.
Okay, that's what I didn't have the information on, and just so that people understand, we discussed this. The Pleiadian, what's the difference between that and the Pleiadians? And the Pleiadians come from where?
Well, the Pleiadians are from the Pleiadian star system, the Pleiades. That's how we identify it. When we first met Billy, he called them the Pleiadians because that's where they came from, the Pleiades. So since then, it's sort of honed down a little bit into the Pleiadian, which is where I guess their home planet is called. It's how they refer to themselves. I still use the term Pleiades because that's what Billy told us. I stick with the original that he told us.
Right. And so, maybe we talked about this earlier. Maybe it's like they call us Earthlings,
right?
But we're humans, and depending on where you live on the Earth, maybe you're American, maybe you're Canadian, or whatever. And so maybe that's just a separate designation. It'll be interesting when I talk to Anna in 9 days, because she said she met beings from the Pleiades, and to figure out if it's a different species. And I'm guessing it probably is. They just come from the same area. Now, another thing that was brought up in my research, and I'm sure you've written about it, is that in 1964 all contact ceased. And then for another 11 years, there was no contact at all. And then all of a sudden, in 1975, he met this female by the name of Samyasa. Okay, I'll never get it right again. I'll just go with that one time. And she was the granddaughter of Sephath, right?
Right.
Which is really interesting. And then later, Ptah and more Pleiadians joined the conversation, and so I guess relationships were built as well, and
Yes.
with different entities or different people from that species and stuff. Now, I Anna's going to have the same kind of experience that Billy had,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess she was invited.
Right.
Billy was invited,
Yes.
but some people aren't invited. Some people are taken. And
Right.
so, how do we explain the difference
Mm.
um, between what Billy experienced, between what Anna, my friend, experienced, and then others who've been taken? And some of them, even the ones that have been taken, you've got those that look at it favorably.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 80% in one of the polls that said if they had a choice of whether it would happen again or not, or if it happened at all, they said they would want it to happen again.
Right.
I've got other friends, though, unfortunately, that don't feel the same way. They feel like whatever they experienced, some of them say they're grays and other beings, but they were like the most evil beings and they tortured them and it's awful. And so, how do we explain the difference
Mm.
between what Billy and Anna experienced and especially what the second group of those that were taken? How do we explain the difference between those experiences?
It's really hard to do, but I've run into the same thing with the different groups and how they've reacted. Um, when you talked about the 11-year period of time where there were no contacts for Billy, that's because they were studying him to see if he would be compatible with their vibrations, their thoughts, their discussions. Probably the same thing happened with Anna. With these other people, I think sometimes happenstance gets in the way, like with Travis. He saw the object and he walked towards it. He opened himself to that experience by walking towards it. Some of the others that are literal abductions, I can't explain. I don't know, other than kind of like what we do here to animals, to plants, to each other sometimes, where we invade that space of that person and we conduct tests and we take blood and we do all these other things. Are they watching us and thinking, oh, they do that, so it must be okay? So they do it too without an understanding? I don't think all civilizations that are visiting us are on an equal footing with the Pleiadians or some of the higher developed groups. I think many of them are still kind of low level, and they may be the ones that are abducting people and animals and doing these things that the people can't get over because it's locked into your mind. It's such a fearful aspect in the first place when you're looking at something that you can't recognize, that's small, gray or green, has no mouth, big black eyes. That's going to be enough to scare the hell out of everyone.
I think
So,
that's I think that's the initial reaction for anybody that gets abducted.
yes,
But
yeah,
there's some of them that end up going to the point, okay, I got over the trauma of it and I look
mhm,
at it and it looked this way to me, but then other ones go a different direction. And I noticed that they use the word strangers for other alien species. And so
yeah.
what would be the reason to use the word strangers? What's your understanding of that?
Uh, yeah, I really don't have a good understanding of that. It's to me, it doesn't make sense because I know they work within councils and within groups and all of that. According to many contactees, not just Billy, but according to many that have had experiences. So
Could they?
why they would be strangers is curious.
Yeah. My question was strangers to them or
Yeah,
strangers to us,
yes, yeah.
and stuff. And so, which is it? I've got some theories on these things, and it doesn't mean that I'll put a couple of these up here so that people that are getting involved so that they can see their posts being put up here. But I've had some thoughts on this, and you may not know this, you probably don't, but I'm actually a pastor, and I'm not your normal pastor. So not very many pastors that got a YouTube channel and believes in the phenomenon and all of this. But part of me is thinking there's with the ones that are really on the what they call the evil side and what they describe, and I don't care which religion you look at, they all have some version of an evil spirit. You know, it might be called demons in several different religions, different groups. And so, you know, for some of them, it's possible. I'm not saying this is what it is, but I'm just saying it's possible that maybe this is on a more dark spiritual level, because a lot of it happens, at least what I've read about, and I could be wrong on this, is when people are in their beds asleep.
Yes.
And so it's hard to know if it's an actual physical abduction or what, or if it's some kind of spiritual abduction, or whether it's just somebody's messing with their minds.
That's
and
right.
stuff. But the ones I've talked to that, at least the ones, the few sample size I have of the people that I've talked to, you know, I've never talked to Billy, but I understand what he's saying, not necessarily abduction, but contact. It's the idea that it's more of a positive experience than a negative one.
And a chosen experience too.
Right. Do you think, because people have asked this question, do you think whether it's positive or negative has more to do with the person than with the experience itself?
Yes, I do. I really do. I think someone that approaches everything from a standpoint of fear, that they're afraid of literally everything in their life or anything unknown, I think they're going to set themselves up for a negative experience. I think someone who is better balanced and has a more open mind and is curious, doesn't have anything to do with intellect or knowledge or book learning, any of that. It has to do with the curiosity, basically, from the heart and spirit. Do you want to know what that is? Are you going to walk towards it? Are you going to start a communication? That I think will have always a more open and positive experience.
Well, and like with some people, it may be one of those things where at first, like with Travis Walton, I was really blessed to be able to meet him in 2022 in Roswell. He was at the museum and selling books. And I don't know why, but I was like the only one there with him and his wife, Dana, and just really humble man. But originally, you know, he was pretty traumatized by it.
He
In fact,
was.
when it was over, I mean, he had to get away from people. He had to recuperate. But over time, he kind of reevaluated what took place. And one of the things that he had said is that when that blue beam hit him, he thinks it did some damage to his heart. And one of the reasons they actually took him on board the craft was to try to undo that damage. And he says possibly why that machine, whatever it was on his chest, was there. And but like I said, whenever he saw the aliens, he had no concept of that, and he reacted very angrily. But given enough time, I've talked to Mario Woods about it, and like I say, he'll be back on the show. And I think he's somewhere in between, trying to figure out where he is on that one side that he's on. But I know it was pretty traumatic. I mean, it'd be for anybody. I mean, if you didn't know it was coming and your mind just isn't ready for it, your paradigm just has no understanding, because we've been told our whole lives that they don't exist. People make fun of you if you do. You're tin hatter, and we know the CIA had something to do with that. The ridicule was one. Denial and ridicule were their two prongs of attack, and kind of not making excuses for them, but we had a big thing going with the Soviet Union. And the reason they did it is because they felt like we had too much attention over here, on the UFOs and what's going on, and the reports were coming in that we were taking our eye off the Soviet Union. And so that's why they tried to take it away. Now, why they're doing it today, it's a whole nother ballgame. I mean, I think reverse engineering can probably have a lot to do with it. If this technology can get reverse engineered, it can change us quite a bit. And so, if they had such an important message. This is kind of one of the questions, and because Billy, part of the question is why did they pick Billy? Because they had such an important message that they had survived, I guess I'll put it that way, and that they want to give to us so that we make sure we survive. Is why a one-armed farmer in Switzerland? Why would they choose someone like Billy? Why not a statesman? Why not somebody who's a professor in a university or something like that?
We had great conversations with psychiatrists and psychologists about that. And they all had a sort of a similar idea and answer. And that is that simply, why not Billy Meier? If you gave it to a politician, to a statesman, they're going to be looking, the public is going to be looking for what is the reason behind it? Why are they doing this? What are they trying to get from us? Because people don't trust politicians. Why not give it to a university professor? Very simple. That university professor has the ability to take and have materials made that are metal samples that are unique, or photographs that can't, have an explanation behind them, or movie footage or whatever. So why not a simple farmer that is not financially well off at all, that has nothing really to gain from this? Why not give it to him and let the people make a decision based on that? If you had a craft land today at the White House, we'd claim it was AI. We wouldn't look at it from the standpoint of, wow, what can we learn from this? No, somebody manipulated it. By giving it to such a simple man, how did he manipulate all the evidence? And the point was the evidence. In the beginning, make people realize that they're not the only thinking beings in the universe. And the evidence will support Meier's claims of contact, and therefore they're not the only thinking beings in the universe. It's a big difference.
I see a couple of similar examples that come from my faith as well. When they were going to announce the birth of Jesus, who were the ones that announced? It was the shepherds, the lowly shepherds. Of all the people to pick to go get the message out, why shepherds? And then when you look at Jesus' disciples, the one that he chose, they were the outcasts, they were the fishermen, they were the tax collectors, they were the zealots. And so, and like I said, I can imagine that there's a lot of similarities in the sense that who we think are the most effective witnesses or the most effective people to do it may not actually be the most effective. And I think you're going to get this a little bit later about the reason why they chose Billy. But let's just go back to the Pleiadians for a minute. We have a common ancestry. Isn't that not what Semyosis said?
Yes, Semyosis said that their forefathers are our forefathers, and that they actually came to this planet Earth and helped populate the planet. Not just them, but many other groups as well.
Okay. And so 3,500 years. This is the one thing, so we're talking about them being Pleiadians and stuff, but wherever they're living in the Pleiades, that is not their original home, correct?
It isn't. Their original home was in Lyra, and they had, unfortunately, similar problems on their planet as we have today. They had something similar to a nuclear war and destroyed their planet. A group left, went to the Pleiades. Also, groups went to the Hyades and other places as well. But they went to the Pleiades where they had to engineer a planet that they could then survive on. We don't have that ability right now. And one of the things they're most concerned about is the fact that we are still warring each other. We have such a complex civilization grouping where one is right, one is wrong. You got to fight. It's that whole We have to have an enemy to believe we are real. That's what they're worried about.
Yeah, that we don't suffer the same fate. And
That's right.
you know, it's interesting because they had to be ahead of us um, technologically,
Yes,
and they still, at that point in their evolution, they still had some of the same problems we did. And if we're not careful, we can have the same result. But in our case, it would be even worse because we don't have the ability to go and create our own, manufacture our own planet
that's right.
and stuff. You know, that they had that on us. They had the ability to leave. We really don't have that luxury. And so we need to get it right
Yeah.
the first time. Although I was talking to a friend of mine who he owns a Mexican restaurant in town, and I started introducing him to the subject. He knows I'm a pastor, but into the subject of UFOs.
Uh-huh.
And so he opened up about a theory of his, and then I heard it later on in a video, is the possibility that maybe we've been here before. Maybe we have risen to this point only to destroy most of ourselves and have it start over again. And I don't know how you could ever prove that, but um, it's an interesting theory to think that maybe we've been here before. But I don't know. I just, with many nuclear weapons as we have today, it just scares me to think that we may not get an, you know, if even if we had a previously got second and third chances, there's no guarantee that we're going to get another one.
Right.
I want to put this question up there. It says, do you think Billy was selected as a message to the rest of us of how his mindset and existence was the ideal qualities that the Pleiadians originally upheld in their earlier civilizations?
Oh, interesting question. Billy was selected. Now here we go, and I don't know how many of your viewers will take this, but Billy says he was selected partially because he had had a past life as a Pleiadian, leaning into what you were just saying.
Mhm.
But also, he had maintained a neutrality in his soul enough that he wasn't leaning one direction or another. And that's one of the reasons they selected him. Plus the fact that he was just a simple man, a farmer, and he didn't have anything to prove.
Isn't it interesting, though, when you think about what you just said, and I thought about it too, of all the countries for Billy to be born in,
Yeah.
Switzerland,
The neutral.
the neutral country. And so that would be very interesting as well. One of the things that they have done is they called us Earth humans. Did we talk about that already? The idea that
Little
maybe
bit,
yeah, maybe we did earlier. I don't remember if we talked in podcast or when we were talking before, but separating the ancestry. So I think we did. We talked about the
Mm-hmm.
ancestry, and we are the Earth humans, but we're literally all, at least the Pleiadians and us, they're humans as well, because we have that common ancestry as well. One of the things that they have said, and I want to dig into this one a little bit, because is they said they will not interfere with our power structure. Is that correct?
They will not interfere yet with us because they feel like we have to take responsibility for ourselves, our own actions. We have to learn from them. We have to change what's wrong and move forward with what's right. That's the only way we're going to maintain civilization on this planet. But when they said we will not interfere yet, we specifically asked Billy, does that mean regarding nuclear? What does that mean? And he said it could be that they don't want us to destroy the planet like they did theirs, their original homeland in Lyra, and therefore they might interfere at that point in time. But other than that, it's up to us to figure out how to learn to live together, how to learn to communicate with each other, and how to be better individuals and as a collective on this planet. Realize we're all related and we're not going to do any good to each other if we keep trying to harm each other.
It's a complicated question because, I'm a pastor and
Mm-hmm.
God gets the same question, and I will put it to the Pleiadians as well because it's basically the same question. People get mad at God because bad things happen, evil things happen, and God has the ability to do something about it, but he chooses not to, maybe for some of the same reasons you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like it's like you're saying with your kids, you can't do everything for them. You
Right.
have to let them learn from their mistakes. And yet there are events in history, like World War II, like all of the Jews that were exterminated. And you look at the different wars. And one thing we know about war is that more civilians than combatants die in war.
Yes.
And then you talk about the famines like in Ethiopia and in the past and stuff like that. It's like, I'm just talking from my own opinion. The older I get, the softer I seem to be getting. But I mean, how can, whether you're talking about God or whether you're talking about the Pleiadians, how can you sit by and watch those things happen and not do anything? And then I think that's a question that others might have as well.
That's a really tough one. And for me, it would be almost impossible. And I can't speak for the Pleiadians, but I can understand as a parent that if I tell my child that stove is hot and they touch it, I know that once they touch it, they're never going to touch it again. That's kind of how they're looking at us. We have to learn, but we have to learn at a different level, on a different pace than what we're learning now. As far as famine and things like that, those are problems that can be taken care of. They don't have to be problems. Those are things that we should be responsible for. Caring for each other, caring for ourselves. We don't even care for ourselves spiritually anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to learn how to do that, to learn to care for self, to care for others, and do it in a way where we're not begrudging someone something and we're not feeling like it's taking away from us to do it. But at the same time, we have to be responsible for our own development. And it seems like two different things, but it really isn't. Because you want to grow, you want to learn, you want to prosper, obviously. You want to be better at whatever it is you're doing. But you also should be caring for everything and everyone around you. That includes the earth.
Yeah.
That includes all the people in your life.
Yeah.
And it's a heartfelt connection, really, that gets you to that point. It doesn't mean that you take all your money and you put it over there to give away to something else. But we can learn to develop ways to feed people, to care for people. We don't have to sit back and watch a famine happen. It's something that can be taken care of. And we just have to grow to that point.
That's where I was going to say what you say. There's kind of a difference between war and famine. Famine, we can do something about. We've got enough supplies in this world that there shouldn't be a famine, or if it starts, it shouldn't last because
Right.
we have more than enough resources to help those people out. And so that one I would put more on us as human beings for
Right.
not loving each other and other nations and other people to do that. But when it comes to wars and stuff like that, I mean, it's tough because, even especially in the nuclear age, I mean, look at what's going on in Ukraine and other places. It's like, a lot of people want disclosure because they think when disclosure gets here, it's going to solve all of our problems. And I really hope it does. I'm kind of leaning that way. I'm pro disclosure because I'm hoping we're going to get free energy, that we're going once we make contact and stuff like that. But other people will want to argue, well, we need disclosure because we need to know, people need to know what we're up against, and
Of
stuff
course.
like that. Yeah. And
Well,
I'm
we
kind of
are on a polarized planet. I mean,
right.
we have positive and negative, and it's a constant swing back and forth. And when you have one, it's just like if you create something wonderful, eventually somebody's going to try to use it as a weapon too.
Right. That's
So,
exactly it.
yeah,
Well,
unfortunately, we are very polarized in everything we do.
yeah, it's just it's tough because people are hoping that this is going to be the solution, and I'm going, I don't see it. I
Yeah.
mean, I even talked to Steve Bassett about it. It's one of my struggles is I want it. I want disclosure. I want
Mhm.
contact. I want a better world. But then I think, well, there's still going to be people like Putin in it. There's
Yeah.
still going to be, bad leaders who dictators. And so, and Steve's comments, we just make sure they don't get to leadership, that's one of the things. But I want it as much as anybody. I mean, I've got kids, no grandkids yet, but I've got kids, and we need to think about the next generation and the
Yeah.
generation after that and the generation after that. Let's go ahead and talk about the
Can I
message.
interrupt just a second? Because you were talking about free energy. That exists. We already know how to create it. So what stops us from doing that? It's corporations. When you go through the Tesla coil and all the information that he provided and everything that could be done there, it's available. So why don't we focus on it? We don't focus on it because it can't be controlled.
Right. And there's, like I said, even with the cars, and you try to get more gas
Right.
mileage, the patent, somebody will come in and take the patent or whatever they need to do to shut that down
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much money involved in all of that. Um, Moving back to Billy and the Pleiadians, we're coming to a close here. How did they communicate with
Oh,
him?
I love this because they did communicate with him telepathically. That was the initial contact when he got kind of a cooling sensation on his forehead and heard a voice tell him to go into the forest and direct him on his moped where to go. That was the first contact. But then Simyasa had learned Swiss German. So she had the availability to speak in his native tongue. They also have something that we all have on our telephones now, language translators. This is back in 1975 when we didn't have those things. But they had a translator where they could speak any language on this planet just by typing in what they wanted to say or saying it to the machine, and then the machine would translate it.
I think telepathy scares a lot of people
I
because if you
love
could
it.
just read people's thoughts, I mean, that probably scares people. Maybe I was trying to filter all you just said. I thought, well, maybe that's why they started with the one and switched to the other, because it would be a little intimidating to have another person being able to read your thoughts. You'd have to be a pretty pure person, which I don't know anybody in my life that is, or in my circle, that I would put as that pure. And I don't.
No, but it'd make us strive for that. There
That,
wouldn't be any crime if we were all telepathic.
yeah, that's where we were headed with as we start to dial this down. Is what was the message that the Pleiadians brought to Billy? What was it? Because he became their messenger,
Yeah.
and they spent a lot of years and a lot of time communicating with him. But if you took the message and you just kind of summed it all up,
Mm-hmm.
what would be the heart of the message that they have for us?
I think there's two. One, that we are not the only thinking beings in the universe. I think that's very important, especially with this new generation looking at exploring space big time. But I think the biggest message is that we have to stop thinking with our head so much and start thinking with our heart. We have to connect to the divine. We have to understand that God force that the Pleiadians talk about as well. We have to be cognizant of the fact we're a part of it and it is a part of us. And in that, we have to develop as individuals. And if we can do that, then we can take our place in space, in the cosmos, and do it with some respect and some understanding of the others that live out there.
Okay, so we're not alone.
Right.
And the second one is become loving human beings. And I think you probably would agree with this, or at least get your idea. In the state that we are in, which of course the Pleiadians did this, but will they allow us to do it? Will they allow us to go out into space being as dangerous as we are?
Well, that's the key. How dangerous are we? And right now, we're pretty dangerous.
3 minutes
So
to
we need
midnight.
to pull that back. We need to, as a society of Earth, learn how to be better towards each other and better stewards of the Earth and of space, because we don't want to go pollute what's out there with all that we have here, especially our anger and our frustration that we take out on each other. We just can't do that.
Now, you know Kathleen Martin, probably, or at least you know of her.
I know of her. Yeah.
Okay. Because I went to a UFO conference a couple years ago, and I was still kind of new to it. And I tried really hard. One of the things I did when I went into the UFO subject is I took all of my Christian beliefs and I put them aside.
Yeah.
I didn't want any way to interfere with my understanding of what's going on in ufology or UAP world. And so I put those things aside, but trying to figure out um, what this stuff is,
Yeah.
what this stuff is, and what is it about. And I just think that's something that we have to, as we look forward, we have to be open-minded. And I'm going somewhere with this. And Kathleen Martin talked about vibrations,
Mm-hmm.
and I had never heard that before. And so, you know, for somebody who was just put this aside, even though you put it aside, it's still in the back of your head somewhere, even though you're purposely saying, I'm not going to do this. And so when I first heard it, it was kind of a little shocking for me. And so I understand that when we use that term here, that there's, I guarantee you there's others that feel exactly like I feel. And so when we use the word, because one of the things that the Pleiadians say, one of the things that Kathleen Martin, you know, she voices the same thing, that we've got to raise our vibration level and stuff to get up to where they are before we really are going to be accepted into a, you know, a galactic community and
Right.
stuff. And I realize that's hard for some people to grasp. Tell me if I'm right. Is if
You're
we could,
right.
okay, if we could say it a different way to make it easier to digest for people
Mm-hmm.
that maybe aren't, you know, into the vibration type stuff, or are just
Oh,
not there yet, just not there yet for that terminology. Couldn't we just say being a more loving, kind, caring person? Wouldn't?
absolutely. And if you look at it from the standpoint, everybody's had this experience. You meet someone and you just want to back away from them. You don't
Mhm.
feel comfortable with them. Okay, that's feeling that vibration. You're reacting to that. So when people talk about vibrations, it is a frequency, but it is a feeling as well. And it's a feeling that resonates within. And that's intuition, whatever you want to call it, but you recognize it. And everybody has that experience. But if we become more loving, giving, caring people, we naturally raise those frequencies. And if we stay centered and not be the extreme polarity that this planet loves to play in, we also raise those frequencies.
Well, even as a pastor, you know, I've been down several rabbit holes. I've gone this direction, you're more legalistic because I wasn't strong enough. But I finally to find some peace where my thinking is, because you know, as a pastor, my mind has changed quite a bit since I got into this subject. But so the thing I try the most to do, the one thing that I try to teach my people is the
Mhm.
great commandment, which is love God and love people. And I just say, if we do those two things, I mean, we don't need a bunch of rules. You know, we don't need to be judging people and stuff like that. Let's just start loving people, because if you're judging people, you can't really do those two at the same time.
Right.
And so I'm going to choose to love people. And so I think the message, if we could put it and frame it for the people that maybe don't quite understand vibration, and maybe
Mhm.
it's a barrier to them, maybe just becoming a more loving, kind, caring human being. And I think that from what I'm hearing from you and what I've read and studied that that's the message of the Pleiadians. Just
Yes.
become better human beings. And I think that you said it in an interview I was listening to. It's just, we can't make everybody that way, but we can start with ourselves.
You have to start with yourself,
Right.
because you can't change anyone else. You can only change yourself. I had a conversation not too long ago with Billy, and I said, how do you feel about these people that attack you? And he says, I'm learning to love them, because if I love them, my love overcomes that. Makes perfect sense to me.
All right. So Billy's message, the reason they chose him is because he modeled it. They found his vibration level, his humanity. I mean, the very thing you described about when the sun tore his camera apart.
You're right.
That's, it's moving towards the kind of humanity that we need to be and to get to. It's a journey and we definitely have a long ways to go.
Right.
But if the Pleiadians are capable of doing it, then so are we.
Absolutely. There's nothing to stop us but ourselves.
Right. Exactly.
That's it. We just need to, as you said, love God and love each other and love self, because today we seem to sort of forget that we're involved in that too, in that connection to our individual selves to the divine. It just is something we've misplaced.
Sometimes the self is the hardest one to love.
Yeah, it is.
Because, we've got a memory and we know the mistakes we've made. We've known the people that we've hurt along the way. And so sometimes the hardest person to love is ourselves. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is ourselves.
Yes, definitely.
Is there anything else you want to add, or you want to wrap this up?
I just have enjoyed this thoroughly. I love the discussion, the in-depthness of it. It's beautiful. So I really appreciate it. It's been good.
Yeah, I've absolutely. You're the second lady I had, and I'm not pointing out ladies, but I had Margie Kay on, and I can tell you it's just a more relaxed conversation, just a different level of conversation too. Maybe more on an emotional level, I guess. I don't know how to explain it. All I know is that I've had two of you on, and I've really enjoyed the conversation immensely with both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, but anyway, I want to wish
a pleasure.
Yeah, I want to wish you the best, and I want to thank you once again for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. To everyone else who's out there watching, I just want to ask you to go ahead and subscribe. Go ahead and share this podcast if you would, please, and help this channel out. It's a newer channel, but I've been very fortunate. I'm going to say I've been very blessed with the guests that I've had so far, and I just want to ask you to subscribe and share and hit that like button if you can. Anyway, we'll see you on a week from Friday. We'll have Mario Woods and the Nordic Queen Anna, and then Rob Heatherly will be coming back on helping me co-host that one as well. So have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you're at. Thank you.